You're watching Experience Comic Culture and Sales. Streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
2, 1.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Good afternoon. It is time for Talking Shop, and the Ferris wheel of fun has spun once again, and you landed on me. So you get me today. And who are we talking to? Well, you'll find out after the break. But I got to tell you that I just read the book that we're talking about. And some of you are going to recognize this character instantly if you're older like I am. If you're not, this may be something new to you, but trust me, having just read the book, all of you should be paying attention. This is something really good here, and you guys want to stick around for this. So be right back with our guest. Hey everybody, welcome to Talking Shop. Today we are going to be joined by a guy who's worked on X-Men, Wildcats, Superman, part of the Man of Action creative team that created Ben 10. I mean, this guy has done it all, and now he is tackling one of the iconic cartoon characters from the 1960s, Jonny Quest. So please welcome a good friend of mine, Joe Casey.
Hey.
How you doing, Joe?
Good, Dan. How are you, man?
I'm doing good. I see you're still doing the sunglasses, man. I love it.
Well, that way I could sleep through this interview, you know. You never know.
That's not fair because I was going to sleep through the interview. So.
Oh, all right.
So let's just dive right in. I just finished reading the first issue of Jonny Quest, which comes out Wednesday. And I don't think you and I are that different in age. So we weren't alive when Jonny Quest was first on the air. I mean, 64, 65, but it was replayed enough when we were kids that we got to understand that, and Ray Spannon and, you know, and Hudgy and Bandit and stuff. So it is part of the nomenclature, but I can't say it was ever one of my favorites. You know, Herculoids were a little higher for me, stuff like that. But sitting down and reading what you wrote, I'm in. I am totally in. You took it ways that I didn't expect, and we'll talk to that. But what was your background with?
Well, the same as yours, probably. I mean, it was kind of ubiquitous as a kid. Every 2 or 3 years, it would run on a different network back when there was only 3 on Saturday mornings. And it was just on. It was like comfort food in a way. I didn't really think much of it at the time, except that I thought it was great. I thought it looked great. Loved the music, loved the characters. But my real investment in the whole thing was in the 80s with the Comico comic book series, written by the great William Messner Loebs and drawn by a host of cool artists. And people maybe might not remember, that was not only was it a great comic, it was really a successful comic. People really loved it, and you could see why. So that, to me, had more of an impact on me. And then looking back, since I've had this gig, I've realized that the cartoon has a lot of great comic book pedigree to it. I mean, between Doug Wildey, the creator, and Alex Toth, the designer, it's as comics accurate a cartoon as you're going to see, especially even in comparison to the other things that we both grew up with, like Super Friends and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Jonny Quest looked like a comic book.
Yeah,
you know, it had the artistry and the depth of a comic book. So, you know, when Dynamite offered me the gig, after not very long of thinking about it, that's where I realized, you know, what that series meant to me and how close and a kinship I have with it because it's so comic book adjacent.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I remember the comic series as well, and picking up some of the issues and stuff. But I'll tell you the truth. The last time I really thought about Johnny Quest had to be when back in 2016, when Mike Pence was picked as the vice president. I went, "Isn't that Race Bannon?"
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that's Race Bannon.
Yeah. Until he opened his mouth, then you knew he was the furthest thing from Race Bannon.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, the thing about Race Bannon that always amazed me is he was the protector of Johnny and Haji and the bodyguard and all that stuff, but he was also their tutor, which just struck me as odd because I don't remember him doing much tutoring. And
Yeah.
you know, is that, do you pick up on that at all in the series?
No, I don't put them in the classroom much. There's a little bit too much going on. But yeah, I never thought of Race Bannon as enough of an intellectual to be in that teacher role. I thought he was meant there to be their bodyguard and then to occasionally teach them kung fu and maybe sunbathe on the beach at Palm Key, you know.
Yeah.
That seems to be one of the three activities that they would be involved in with Race.
Yeah. Now, I always think of the series, and it seems like like you said, it was on always. It was constantly on. But then you realize there was only 26 episodes.
Yeah, right.
You know? And there really weren't that many recurring villains. They were all, or most of them were one and dones. Are you pulling any of the villains from the old series?
Yes, I am. I mean, they do have, anybody who's a Johnny Quest aficionado knows they do have one primary villain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so we had to go to him in the series for sure. And you know, that villain, you've got to sort of dance between the raindrops to present him in a way that's not culturally inappropriate, but I think we got him.
Yeah, I wondered if that was who it was that I saw, and yeah, he's similar to some of the Marvel villains from the 60s that they've had to kind of skirt around certain things like names, you know.
Yeah. Skin color, nationality, ethnicity, all those great things.
Yeah, it's like going back to the old Will Eisner books. It's like the spirit is awesome, but then the cabbie, it's like, oh God.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't like to judge these things too harshly because these things are always of their time.
Right.
But in doing the series, it was definitely, that was my second thought, is like, okay, maybe there's some elements that I'm going to have to tiptoe around. But pretty quickly I realized if you just play things straight, they tend to work out, you know?
Yeah.
And so as opposed to being hopefully not any kind of bad stereotype, they just become definitively themselves, you know, just a singular character. And it seems to have worked out so far. I mean, I you know, and with, I mean, Haji too. Haji on first glance is like, well, I don't know about this. But then I did the research and, you know, there's some accuracies there. The depiction is one thing, but I can write him however I wanted to. So I was able to kind of, again, sidestep some of the more inappropriate cliches. But fundamentally, the character is pretty sound, I found.
Yeah, I mean, he always kicked a little ass. I mean, he was. Yeah, I thought he was a little more confident than Johnny was.
Yeah,
or competent. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. I'm trying to balance the spoilers.
Yeah,
having read it, but let's do it this way. You were the first issue is coming out of the Free Comic Book Day issue. But not everybody got to Free Comic Book Day.
Yeah.
So if you are walking in the store on Wednesday you're picking up the book, what do you, I mean, because you have the little asterisk in there going, see the Free Comic Book Day. But if they don't have that, what do they need to know going into the issue?
Well, hopefully it's recapped in the first couple of pages, but basically they were, the series begins and is set in the original era of the show. I mean, one thing about the Kamiko series is Bill Loeb's transposed the whole concept into the 80s. It was a modern series. It just had all the same elements. I really was adamant about setting it in its original time period. So it begins in 1964.
Okay.
By the time issue 1 begins, they're not in 1964 anymore.
Right. That's what I was trying to figure out how to get around.
Yeah, yeah. But I thought it'd be interesting to begin in the element that in the comics they'd never been in before, true to their original time period, and then take those characters of that time period out of their natural element and see how they would react and see how it would play. So I know we're trying to be coy because the book's not out for another 2 days, but yeah, it starts in 1964, but it doesn't stay there.
Now, by starting it in 1964, does that make it easier to deal with some of the more problematic issues? Because again, it is of its time.
No, I mean, I didn't really think of it that way. Like I said, I still played it straight. I still played it at face value. But in the overall story that we're telling in this first arc, it definitely makes a difference that the characters are rooted in the early 60s, and where they end up in the majority of the first arc, that those sensibilities that they would have as the kids would have and as the adults would have, colliding with the circumstances they find themselves in, that to me was the initial hook of the story, taking those characters out of their natural element, putting them into an unfamiliar spot. It's sort of like what the greatest Johnny Quest episodes are writ large on another level, not just taking them to some distant spot on the globe, but actually taking them to another point in time.
One of the things, and I'm again dance around spoilers here, but there was a moment in the book where everybody realizes what's going on, but it's separate. Doc and Race over here, Haji and Johnny over here.
Yeah.
And they decide not to tell the other group. But the reason is kind of interesting. And one of the things that always drives me crazy about, I don't want to call them young reader books, but basically books that star younger kids as the main characters, is the constant decision not to tell the adults.
Yeah.
I mean, like, how quickly would Harry Potter have been a lot shorter book had he actually went to Dumbledore going, check this out?
Right. Right.
So I love the fact that you had a reason for Johnny not to tell them that was perfectly logical, but is that something that you kind of have to deal with when you write younger? I mean, because you've also done Ben 10, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is that something you have to deal with a lot when you're writing younger characters?
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily a conscious thing. I just know that when I write characters, no matter what age they are, I want them to have agency. I want them to have control over their own decisions and have their own thoughts about things, and it not just be arbitrary, character choices. So considering what Johnny and Haji find, like their confirmation of what's happened to them is pretty grim. And, I just like the idea that they were protecting the adults in a way in that moment. They were, I think Johnny says, adults don't want to hear about this stuff. It spooks them,
Yeah.
I just thought that was a good, because Johnny and Haji have always occasionally in the show displayed these sort of nuggets of wisdom, and so this was a chance to sort of show that side of their characters.
You've got some great cover artists on this. I mean, Jay Lee is Tom Rainey. I believe Tom Rainey is one of them.
Bob Layton.
Bob Layton.
Yeah.
But each of the cover artists kind of go in their own style.
Yeah.
But the interior art, the Sebastian Pires, is it Pires?
Pires, yeah.
Yeah, is doing just feels like the show.
Yeah.
I mean, that is it almost blew me away with how much it felt like it was the cartoon jumping on the page.
Yeah.
Now, did you suggest Sebastian? Was that something your editor had?
I did suggest Sebastian. I didn't know him personally, but I saw his work, and I just had a feeling if he was up for the gig that he would be able to nail that specific look that is not Doug Wildey. Obviously, it's not Alex Toth, but it evokes that sense of style, while at the same time Sebastian's totally doing his own thing. Mm-hmm. So I knew that if we could find the right guy, then this series would work. And so when I saw Sebastian's other stuff that he'd done, and the first sketches that he did for us for the Johnny Quest character, we were just like, done deal. You know, this guy, he totally gets it. You know,
you're right. It doesn't feel like he's vamping somebody else's work.
Right.
It just feels like he's drawing his stuff, but it does just meld into what you expect. I mean, from, all the way down to Bandit,
Yeah.
Now, what is the plan for the book? I mean, with the cartoons, of course, they were kind of one and done adventures most of the time. Are you doing a big overall story arc at first, or are you doing more individual stuff?
I mean, the first story is 5 issues. I wanted to really do something like, I wouldn't say it's not Johnny Quest the movie, but I wanted to do a big, expansive story because, again, the comics were usually done in ones or maybe 2-parters. I think later on in the run, they started to do more extended stories, but the issues that I remember reading as a kid were these done in ones because they had different artists. They would bring in different artists for each issue. Yeah. So to me, it felt like, well, doing a more of an episodic story had not been done with Johnny Quest before. So it was breaking a little ground there with this character, and it's a big idea that we're dealing with, and there's a lot of facets to explore and a lot of ground to cover just to do the idea justice. So I knew it was going to be a longer story for that reason alone.
I'll tell you that as I started reading it, I kind of picked up what the twist was going to be early on.
Sure.
But it wasn't one of those like, oh, he's telegraphing everything. It was more of the wanting to read quicker to see if I was right.
Yeah.
Which was really cool. It's not something I experience a lot when I'm reading comics these days, that excitement. Like I said, I was really blown away by the book. So.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I think, it's weird. I don't want to, this is not the most, this is not a nuclear secret that we're trying to keep, but I do want to let readers get it on their own, Mm-hmm. But, hopefully after the book is out, and I can talk about it some more where we can just talk just straight up what it is and what's involved, because it really is, it's in a sense, it's the hook of the story, but it's not the point of the story. And there's a difference. The hook is meant to get you interested, like, oh, I haven't seen this story told with these characters before. But the opportunities that presents dramatically and emotionally, that was really what I wanted to get to most of all. Mm-hmm. So this story hook is a way to do that, a way to get to that. But it's by no means, once you read issue 1, it's just the story's just beginning, really.
I'm kind of curious. I know a little bit about how your creative process, because I remember going to San Diego Con, a panel you did where you broke down your creative process.
Oh,
You know, laying out the page, 100 or laying out all the pages, stuff like that. And I do a similar process. So I was kind of, that actually encouraged me when I was starting. But do you approach books like this differently than, say, a Superman book or the X-Men because of the age of the characters? Or is there a similarity to them?
the process is generally always the same because you're just telling stories, and how do you break those stories down? Um, so I wouldn't say there's a big difference. I think, again, with a lot of the stuff I've been doing in comics lately has been these bigger stories that are multi-chaptered. So it's that sense of like you're starting with the macro and then whittling it down to the micro.
Mm-hmm.
So at first I figure out, well, okay, how many issues does this feel like it should be? And once I settle on that, then you start, well, where are the breaks? What am I trying to accomplish in every issue? And then once you get that sort of straightened out, you go issue to issue and break it down, page by page. So the mechanics of it are always the same. And it's balancing that with, personally for me, it's balancing the mechanics of with the enthusiasm to do the work, the enthusiasm for the characters and for the story. Because what I've learned in the last, 25 years is that the experience of writing a comic is obviously a lot different than reading a comic. But having said that, when I'm writing, I still want that buzz of like being surprised, being excited about in this case, not turning the page, but writing the next page. Because I don't want it to be such a separate feeling. I mean, I always call it when you're in the store and you get that flip through effect where you pick something up off the shelf and you can't help but just flip through it just to see what kind of buzz you get off that initial look at what's on that page, or look at that, or I can't wait to, get that home and read that. I want to feel that when I'm writing. So that's become part of the mechanics. I sort of, in a way, delude myself into being the audience and the writer simultaneously. It's a weird trick to play on yourself, but it pays off in dividends with the actual comics. I feel like readers can pick up on that excitement that you put into it when they read it. If it's just, I never want to be sort of paint by numbers, because I think readers pick up on that too. They, oh, I've seen this before. I understand how this plays out, and it might be even well done, but they're not getting the buzz. And I want them to get the buzz because I want to get the buzz out of writing it. So that never changes, no matter what the subject matter, or no matter what the characters are.
Now, with Johnny Quest and other Hanna-Barbera properties over at Dynamite now, they've also done Thundercats recently, and Gargoyles, and Space Ghost, and just there seems to be this love of nostalgia for that era of cartoons and stuff right now. Where do you think that comes from?
That's a great question. I mean, I think because it's weird because, Thundercats has been a big hit. Space Ghost has been doing really well. But they're from two different eras, if you think about it. Although, I guess you could count Space Ghost as modern in the coast to coast aspect of it, so people know about the character. So I'm sure that when they read the comic, they're really thrown for a loop. It's like, oh, this game show host is actually a serious heroic character. But I think it's just, for the most part, it's that cyclical nature of pop culture. Because there's been Thundercats comics before over the past 15 years or so. Wildstorm did some comics, Thundercat comics, but I think for whatever reason, that it's the right property for the right age of the median audience that it fuels it, and also for the retailers too. I mean, I think the retailers are just as much of an audience for this stuff as their customers are.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I think that the way I view pop culture is that if an idea has real merit or real juice to it, and people hook into it, you have this upward trajectory, which goes from, let's say, comic book to maybe toys to maybe animation to maybe a TV show to maybe a movie, right? It sort of builds and builds and builds until it sort of burns itself out. Now, even though I love the movies and I love, like Wolverine, Deadpool, or Deadpool, Wolverine, sorry. Those big Marvel DC IPs are now global phenomenons. They're globally known. The discovery of those things is less and less because so many people know about it. I can't believe how many people know about the concept of the multiverse. Now is sort of very solid in the culture. So I think when there's still IP out there that hasn't been completely and totally mined and drained of all of its energy, that readers and retailers want to get behind those things, So that's kind of my armchair philosophy on why something like Thundercats has hit so hard this year. I could be completely wrong. I'm happy to be wrong about it, but that's kind of what it feels like to me, that things reach a boiling point and then they boil over, and then you got to find the next thing to get excited about, and that's kind of where we are with these. For some reason, these animated properties are filling that need right now.
Do you think the majority of readers are your 40, 50-year-olds? Or do you think that there's enough of a youth movement to kind of keep things going?
I don't kid myself into thinking that there's a lot of younger readers for the type of comics that we grew up with, and the format that we're still doing. I mean, I think the younger readers have obviously gravitated to manga and webtoons and things like that, which doesn't bother me as long as the medium is still there. Then I'm not worried, and I feel like that there's enough of an enthusiastic crowd still buying these stapled comics that there's room for all of it. But I definitely don't sit around going, wow, I can't, it's going to be great when a 12-year-old reads Johnny Quest #1. There's no 12-year-olds reading Johnny Quest. I mean, if their parents give it to them, maybe, but they're not going out and buying them. They don't feel about them like I felt about the Avengers when I was 10 years old. I mean, I was all in. It was my whole life was that comic book.
Oh, yeah.
But it's just, times change and society evolves, and it's fine,
Yeah. No, I was like you, reading the Avengers, trying to figure out how come everybody under their masks looks exactly the same.
Well, hair color was different sometimes.
Very rarely. Most of them were blondes.
Yeah.
I mean, even Donald Blake looked like Steve Rogers and Clint Barton. And
true. That's very true. Yeah.
I'm kind of curious. There's a section in there that is pseudoscience, and I'm always fascinated by the approach to writing pseudoscience. I mean, Gene Roddenberry always made it that it didn't matter if it was real, it just had to be consistent.
Yeah.
If the lithium crystals acted this way here, they're going to act the same way here, here, and here. What is your approach to doing pseudoscience? Do you try to get as close to realism as possible and then add to it, or
I don't care if it is real. I just want it to sound real. So it's a version of Roddenberry's ethos, but because I do believe consistency is important as well. But I'm all about, it's the Aaron Sorkin approach. It's the sound of the language. Is it convincing? Are the characters committed to what they're saying? Do you, as a reader, do you buy it at first blush? I don't know if the pseudoscience I've come up with over the years stands up under close scrutiny, but but people reading it just as part of the story, I've never really gotten tagged on. I've sort of gotten away with it sounding authentic in the moment. And that's kind of the best that I can hope for, you know?
I'm always fascinated by pseudoscience in comics because you can go all the way back to the 50s and 60s, and Stan Lee was great at the pseudoscience.
Yeah.
But as you know, we know now, totally wrong.
Yes. That's right.
But I do love the fact that Marvel, when they do these movies, still try to embrace as much of that pseudoscience as they can.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that's why it's always good to have a character like Dr. Quest around, because he's there to deliver that pseudoscience in this very convincing manner. And then you have, context is key. So when you have Race and Johnny and Haji going, sounds good to me, or it makes sense to me, then they're helping you sell it. They're helping you out a lot in those instances.
Okay. You may not know the answer to this one, but I've always been curious, and I haven't been able to find the answer yet. What happened to Mrs. Quest? And is Race really around just because the doctor doesn't want to deal with the kids?
Well, in the early in the Johnny Quest series at Comico, they do the they do it simultaneously of Race's introduction to the family unit and Mom Quest's passing. I think it's in issue 2 and 3 of the Comico series, you know, Mrs. Quest just came down with the terminal illness. You know, died in her bed. Very sad, very very touching, very heartwarming, and Race is there because the government thinks that Dr. Quest is important, and he's there. He's sort of a government employee, a government operative that turns out to be, you know, that turns out to bond with the family and become the coolest uncle you ever wanted to have. So it all makes sense in my mind, you know, how that backstory.
Now you've mentioned the Comico series a few times. How much are you pulling from that, or are you supposed to stick with the animated series?
That's a good question. To be honest, that single season of the '60s show, that's our Bible. That's what we're pulling from in terms of continuity and character detail and all that stuff. The comic book series is just a personal favorite, so it resonates with me and comes out in the work as an inspiration. But in terms of continuity and story detail, in my mind, I may fall back on that, backstory of the mother, but I wouldn't reference in the comic because it's not referenced in the show. So I'm walking a fine line there, but I can sleep at night with that answer.
Good. I took some notes because I was, like I said, this is all kind of getting back to me. You know, Johnny Quest was always a character I'd look at and go, hey, that's Johnny Quest. And then really didn't know that much about him. So if you've got someone who's coming to the series new, how would you describe this book? I mean, what is Johnny Quest, and why doesn't he have an H in his name?
That the missing H I can't explain. Although, you know, the longer version, Jonathan doesn't have an H in it either, except at the end.
Right.
You know, so you know, I sort of get it. But Johnny Quest is really a precursor to something like Indiana Jones. You know, it's a globe-hopping adventure story with a family of adventurers, with a cool, doctor father, scientist explorer father, the coolest bodyguard you ever would want, and then 2 kids who get to go on, get to see the world, But I would say, it's funny, now, even Indiana Jones, you could say is a kind of a dated reference. But to me, that's the closest thing. I guess you could. This is the. I've never even described it this way out loud before. You could say it's the Venture Brothers played straight.
Yeah.
It sort of turns that whole relationship on its head. But for those who might be, in their 20s or 30s, that's a valid place to go.
Yeah, because the Venture Brothers is kind of a parody of Johnny Quest.
100%. Although I've said this before, the show is so good that even if you know Johnny Quest, you forget about the homage part of it or the satire part of it, and just enjoy the show for what it is. It's that good.
Yeah, it's kind of like Rick and Morty being a kind of a fanfic of Doc Brown and Marty.
Yep.
But after a few minutes, you're like, nope, this is its own thing.
That's right. I'm going to start using that though from now on. It's the Venture Brothers played straight. I think that's got some value to it, some juice to it.
You should let Nick know about that. He might want to put that on the cover.
Right. Yeah.
Jay asks a question. He says, for research, did you rewatch the show and did any episodes still hold up? Going back and watching these older cartoons, sometimes the episodes are a little rough for him.
I did go back and watch them, and luckily they're all on Tubi for free. That whole single season, and I agree that there are moments where you're just like, yeesh. Usually, the depiction of indigenous peoples into the far-flung areas of the world that they travel to, those are bad, straight up, really bad. But for the most part, they hold up in that way that I gravitated towards them as a kid. I mean, the thing that's great about Johnny Quest is the characters, that de facto family unit, and how close they are, how loyal they are to each other. That stands out no matter when you watch it, no matter how old you are. You get that these characters really have each other's backs. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's the heart of the show. So that transcends time and place and period and stereotypes. The emotion of it usually has always been there. So when I went back and watched it, overlooking those other elements where you're a little cringeworthy, I was pleased that still stood out. That the show still has a lot of heart and a lot of for a cartoon. What other people don't remember is it was made to be a prime time cartoon. It showed at night. It was not a morning. They didn't have Saturday morning cartoons at the time.
Right.
So it ran in prime time. So it had a little bit more sophistication than it might have normally. Not much. But the sophisticated nature of it came through, like I said, with that emotion and the character dynamics and the relationships that those characters had. So that was the research that I did just to make sure I wasn't misremembering that it was actually in the show. And luckily, it's a big part of the show.
Now, you're doing something completely unique with the first 5 episodes. Were there any episodes of the original series that you're like, if we get past 5, I want to do something with that, or borrow that idea?
No, because I mean, that had been done already during the run of the Comico series. They did a mini series called Johnny Quest Classics that Doug Wildey did, where he picked 3 episodes and adapted them, and they're great. They're great comics. I recommend. If you can find them, they're fantastic. But the fact that Doug Wildey himself did them, I was like, I don't want to have anything to do with trying to adapt those things. Having said that, the second story arc that I'm just now getting my head around, because I've just finished writing issue 5, is something that if we get to do it, and I think we're going to get to do it, is going to blow people away. Not been done with these characters, not been done in this way. It's going to be something really cool So I'm excited to keep going with this thing. So hopefully we can do it.
Cool. Yeah. Now, who's your editor on this book?
The great Matt Idelson, who I worked with 25 years ago on the Incredible Hulk. He was my editor on that at Marvel. So it was very strange to have that space in between working with a guy, but he's great. It's been great to work with him, and that was, admittedly, that was just as much of a draw to the gig to work with Matt again as anything else having to do with the characters, because he's really great at what he does.
Oh yeah, and he's got a wicked sense of humor.
Most of the time.
Yeah, I don't think I've gotten a completely straight email from him ever. There's always something in it.
Yeah. He thinks he's at a comedy club most of the time. It's just there's just no audience.
So we've spent a good chunk of this on Johnny Quest. So I think we can go into other areas now.
Sure.
What else have you got going on? I mean, are you still doing stuff with Mana Action? Are there more things coming up from that group?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's a lot of. I mean, we've got at the moment we just had Sonic Prime, the show on Netflix, the animated series on Netflix. We've got Hello Neighbor, which is an adaptation of the video game that's on YouTube right now, that animated series. And we've got other things in various stages of production. So that's always ongoing. And in comics, I just wrapped up a series at DC called Kneel Before Zod, which is the infamous General Zod from Krypton. He had a solo series. And then I've got a book coming out from Image right now called Blood Squad 7, which is a take. I'm trying to figure out how to describe it. It's a 90s celebrity superhero team existing in the shared Image Comics universe.
Okay.
So it's part tribute, part contemporary story, part retcon. It's got it all. If you were a kid when Image Comics started, and you invested in the continuity of those first couple of years where the partners were allowing their characters to guest star in each other's books, and you really got that shared universe feel, this is the book for you. This is that same universe 32 years later.
Well, then the important question has got to be: is when does Shadowhawk show up?
Issue 7.
Issue 7. All right.
Yeah.
Now, something I'm always curious about: writing comics, writing animation, scripts. Again, are your approaches different? I know the actual scripting's a bit different. I know the difference between writing comics versus writing live action stuff, but how do you approach them differently, or is there a difference to your approach?
Well, there's a big difference. I mean, to be honest, screenwriting, that format, which I'm sure you know very well, is much easier than writing a full script of a comic. And in a comic book, I mean, if you're doing it the way I do it, you're really describing all sorts of level of detail that in a screenplay or even an animation script, you're not even getting close to. So that's the biggest difference. But of course, there's also when I write for animation, which is really writing for TV, you have a lot more levels of approval to go through and a lot more hoops to jump through. So, as much more detail as you'll find in a comic book script, to me, that's much more organic. I have much more confidence that my vision will be executed on the page almost exactly as I'm hoping to get it.
Mm-hmm.
TV is a lot of, you got to be ready to see a version of your vision on as the final product, as opposed to in comics, it's pretty much from here to the page and nothing in between. And that's part of the reason why I still do comics, is to get that fix, is to be able to execute that vision exactly as I see it. Where TV and movies are certainly a lot more collaborative, rewarding in their own way, but you've got to you have to walk into the room going, okay, I'm going to get some of what I want out of this, but a lot of other people are going to have their say, and I've got to be all right with that. And psychologically, doing comics as well makes it a lot easier to write for animation or write for movies or whatever, and not ever get butthurt when those things happen. So I can always go off and do a comic and get it exactly as I want it.
Right. How do you approach writing realistic dialogue? That's a question I hear asked a lot, and I got to tell you, I really want to know your answer to this.
Well, I don't. It's funny because, again, it's the same thing as I look at it the same way I look at the pseudoscience. It doesn't have to be realistic as long as it sounds or on the page looks realistic. Because a lot of writers that are my favorite writers, if you read their comic book writers I'm talking about, if you read their dialogue out loud, it doesn't sound like anything anyone would ever say. However, on the page, when you read it, it looks right. Mm-hmm. And your mind reads it and interprets it as realistic, as correct, as stylistic, as cool, whatever the writer is trying to put across. If they're doing it well, realism is second nature to intent. So for comics, that's how I sort of go about it. But this applies to everything. What I do, my personal trick is, when I write dialogue, I read it back out loud to myself.
Yeah.
And I sort of, it's not necessarily acting it out, but it's reading. If it's a conversation between two characters, I'll read both parts and that's just for cadence and flow and all those kind of things. And again, sometimes something that has those things when I speak it, sometimes it still doesn't quite look right on the page. So I'll tweak it because I'd rather it read a certain way than to sound a certain way, because I don't assume that people are reading these things out loud to each other or to themselves. So it's really strange, because then you get into this sort of granular thing of a word balloon is just as much a piece of the art as the art. So it's got to look right. It's got to feel right. It's got to have the right balance. It's got to have the right amount of air in it. The tail has to be the right kind of curve. It has to be the right length. All those things, I can get obsessed over. So, word choice is part of that. If something looks right on the page, whether or not it's something that somebody would realistically say, that's second to the impression that it makes when you read it.
Okay. Now, yeah, I know that even the pacing of a story, the amount of dialogue, if you want to slow something down or speed it up, or that's all play there too. But
I've had the unique experience. We did a movie about 7-8 years ago, I think, for Officer Down, which was a comic I did in Image, and I wrote the screenplay, so I was adapting my own work to another medium. And the first thing I did was just transpose the comic into screenplay form, just as a starting point. And when I looked at the dialogue that worked perfectly well in the comic and looked at it and was like, okay, real actors, real human beings are going to have to say these lines, I had to rewrite almost everything because it just would not work as spoken dialogue,
Yeah, I can totally understand that. Triple B says, when writing comics, do you tell the artist what you want on every page, every panel? So how much detail do you put into your panel descriptions?
It depends on the artist. I mean, I put in as much as I can because and they can use it or not use it at their discretion. But if I have it in my head, I tend to feel compelled to put it on the page just so they have it's like an info dump. I'm just trying to get it all out. It's almost like an exorcism on my part. I don't want to leave anything to chance. If some random detail that I had in mind helps that artist get to where they need to go, then I want to give them that opportunity. But I certainly don't want an artist to be feel like they have to adhere to all those details against their better judgment, because they're the artist. They're there to provide their skill set, just as I'm there to provide my skill set. So what I'm always hoping for is that I put in enough stuff and put in enough detail that an artist sees it and then transcends that. It gives them enough of a inspiration, a push, or just an insight into where my head is at, that they know, oh, not only can I provide that, but I can go 1 or 2 levels higher than that. Because, Dan, when we write comics as writers, when we get that art back, when it's better than we imagine, that's like the greatest high you can have as a creative person. And it's fantastic. So I'm trying to give them everything I can to engineer that result,
As a writer, do you find you have any pet peeves when it comes to writing? Like, I can't stand seeing the same word used either more than once in a sentence or in continuing, back-to-back sentences. Just drives me crazy.
I have that same pet peeve. I know I have them. I'm trying to think if there's, because I feel like for me, everything that are my personal pet peeves, I've weeded out a long time ago. But repeating phrases, repeating words, that's definitely a big one. I would say that, I can't think of any that come out of the writing of it. It's, I've got many other pet peeves, but probably not appropriate to discuss in a public forum.
I think I realized I had that pet peeve listening to the Beyonce song where she talks about on the left, because there's a thing, he'll be here in a minute, and then the next line ends with minute. I'm like, no, oh my God.
Yeah.
All right, we're getting pretty close to the end here. So, do you have like that 1 minute sales pitch for Johnny Quest? That little clip that we could play to get people to buy the book?
Well, I mean, aside from the Venture Brothers done straight, I would say that if you love Johnny Quest and really know the show, you're going to get everything you want from this series. We leave nothing behind when it comes to the essential elements and even the Easter eggs that we think Johnny Quest fans will love. If you don't know anything about Johnny Quest, never heard of it before, you can still come to this series and get a good story, fantastic art, and hopefully, if it leads you back to the original show, you definitely won't be disappointed in that when you see it. So it's, to me, I hope it's a win-win on both sides of the equation, whether you know it well or don't know it at all.
All right. Well, thank you, Joe, for your time and for coming on here. And I hope the book does amazingly well. So, like I said, I enjoyed it like crazy. So, I'll be telling everybody to pick it up.
Oh,
but again, thank you for coming on and talking about the book, man.
It's great to see you, Dan. It's been a long time.
It has. I used to drive around. Are you still doing music?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I used to drive around. I used to live in Anaheim, right by Disneyland. And whenever I drive by Disneyland, I had your CD in my car. And the one song about the prom queen, I always played that really loud with the windows open. So I thought Disneyland would appreciate that.
Well done. Well done.
So, all right, guys, we're going to wrap that up there. Check out Johnny Quest on sale on Wednesday, and stick around later today for Comics Collectibles and Best Coast Comics. So they'll be talking about QR codes and comics tonight. So stick around for that, and we'll see you guys later.
Join the party. Head over to our Linktree to find all the links for everywhere the experience is all the time.